It's the Wednesday Wisdom Show, and you need to know the answers to the questions that you put in the comments last week. Last week I asked you to write your questions, any questions that might have been brought up by that silly piece from the infographic that I read last week with the spiritual or deep questions from around the United States by state, hoping that some of that would spur questions for you. But I know that a lot of you have questions after each show. Some of them are addressed in some shows that were already done, and I know it's not possible for everybody to watch every one of these shows, but I suggest you do. But in any topic, there's going to be a lot of things that come up for a person depending on where their starting point is, right? Because most people who watch this do not study Kabbalah. I mean, you're welcome to, but most people don't. So there's always a starting point of very different assumptions according to the development of the person who is watching. So I asked you to put your questions in about things that you've heard either in other shows or just general questions about Kabbalah or general questions that are deep and important for you. So today I'm going to go through all of them that I got. There are a lot of them, so I'm going to jump right into them. And the order by which I'll do it will be according to the order in which they were posted. I'll try not to make these answers too long, because if I did, this would turn into the Thursday Wisdom Show as well. So let's start here. Joel Gonzalez says, this isn't actually a question. This is kind of a PO'd snarky accusative comment, but that's okay, Joel. I appreciate it because it will clarify things. Joel asks, he states, Tony meditates. Every time he's asked the question, he says, no, Kabbalists don't meditate, and yet he does. Okay, well, first of all, number one, I didn't say that Kabbalists don't meditate. Kabbalists are people. They're like you, Joel, and they're like me, and they come from different places, but what makes them a Kabbalist is the study and attainment of the methodology and the result that comes from the methodology in Kabbalah. What I was saying was that meditation is not a part of the methodology of authentic Kabbalah. There's a lot of things that call themselves Kabbalah that say you meditate or you do this, or that the letters and letter sequences and so on are meditation, or they've mixed Kabbalah up with Eastern methods, or there are people writing books out of whole cloth because they never had a teacher in the authentic lineage, and so they include all these things in it that they consider to be spiritual. And but meditation is not a part of authentic Kabbalah at all. Now, the part about me meditating, I learned to do transcendental meditation in my 20s. I learned to do it not for spiritual reasons, but for physiological reasons. And so occasionally I will meditate if I can't sleep, or if I'm, my body's wound up or something. It's the same thing as people doing yoga also for physiological reasons. Yes, it comes out of those things come out of a tradition, but do they represent a spiritual idea? To me personally, not at all. They represent a kind of something that has an effect, a good, curative, positive effect on the physiological level. Emerald Agnostic, that's a great name. What does Kabbalah have to say about destiny, or more specifically, individual destiny? Emerald, I did a complete show on destiny, both the way that it's felt by the individual and how it also has something to do with the larger scope of humans, and their social interactions, but it starts from the point of view of the individual and how they feel destiny, how they seek it, what it means to them. So up here is a link that you can follow to go directly to that show, and you can get that information in a lot more detail. Georges Mugarbel from Montreal, Canada, asked, does every soul have her own spiritual and physical world? When we talk about worlds in Kabbalah, we're talking about an ascent, a change in perception. It is the person and their perception which undergoes the change. Because the light, we're talking about lights and vessels, light being the quality of the Creator, the quality of complete bestowal, its wholeness. It cares about everything all at once without limitation for its maximal fulfillment, development, and fulfillment. This is pure, unconditional bestowal. Love. Bestowal is influence. It is an intention that builds, sustains, and guides all of reality, including you, Georges. It's what gives you your life. And that quality is always at rest. It never changes. It always and only does that. It isn't sometimes giving and sometimes not. It always and only gives. So the amount that we perceive this or don't perceive it, the amount that we are like this or not like it, is what determines the world that we see. If we are less like it, then we see a world in which there's plenty of separation and struggle, pain, things that are very conditional. This is in how our heart and even our physical senses, how they are programmed to perceive things. Now, the more that we become like the quality of the Creator, and this is what the method of Kabbalah is all about, to allow a person to actually attain an inner nature like the nature of the light itself, then you could say that the world of the person becomes spiritualized, in that it takes on the same qualities that we call spiritual, which is the quality of bestowal, the quality of the Creator, and not some other place with sunsets and waterfalls and lions and lambs getting along together. It's not that kind of a picture. It is how we are able to perceive the world that we're actually presented with right now in its true quality. The main principal thing that needs to be transformed in order to perceive the spiritual rather than the physical world, the main partition, is this idea of having an individual physical and spiritual world. We're talking about the experience of a person in this world. So the answer to your question, if you take all of that into account, is that the spiritual world is not the world of the individual. The spiritual world is the all-inclusive perception that is full of the intention that is objective. Subjectivity is the focus on the self. It is the sort of the egoistic framework that creates the physical world and the my world and my perception kind of thing. And spirituality, the spiritual world, is one in which there are no boundaries like that. It is a place that not only belongs to, but is everybody. It is that objective quality. Here's a question about how Kabbalah views mental illness. I'm not going to say the name of the person because I don't know whether or not they really want to be known. I'm diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and while it really sucks sometimes, I'm grateful for it because It helped me find Kabbalah. That's interesting. Thank you, scrupulously. Scrupulously is really perfect for obsessive compulsive disorder. I'd like to think that things like anxiety, depression, and other disorders serve a purpose in propelling us towards the Creator and towards others. I'd like to know more in depth what the purpose is. Maybe it will empower us with these sorts of chemical or physical imbalances. Well, the purpose of any challenge that a person has is always the same, because the goal of life is the same for everybody. The goal is to be able to reach adhesion, connection with, to internalize and live the Creator's quality, this quality of bestowal that I talked about in the previous question. So the way that nature evolves us this way, the way that the Creator evolves this in us, is through the left and the right hand. That is, it will push us in certain ways, limit us in certain ways in order to create a need in us. And it always does that, whether or not a person is on a spiritual path. But the thing about the way that Kabbalah deals with this is that it picks up this process of how nature gives us impediments or setbacks or create situations that make us need things. In Kabbalah, it picks up from the point at which it begins to develop the need specifically to fulfill your purpose in life, to adhere and internalize the quality of the Creator within ourselves. So it's trying to create the correct need. It's aiming us towards that. So with anything and anybody, and in general, we're all ill in the sense that we are disconnected and incomplete in relation to the purpose of our lives and to the sense of health and completeness that really awaits us. We're being guided towards that from a state that is not developed enough to completely live in that. So if a person has like a problem, say with their left foot, they can't move their ankle, this is the same thing as a person having an emotional disorder or a psychological disorder, meaning that it's got something to do with the chemistry of the body. Same thing. The Torah, or correction by the light, which is what or is light, and the instruction by the light, that's what Torah means, is just it's a medicine. It's a medicine for the current state that we're in, that brings us to wholeness. Now, it's exactly the same for a person with any type of a disorder. And even if you didn't have a disorder, you would still be going through this process on one level or another. It could be purely emotional. It could be just the circumstances of life. But they're all happening for exactly the same purpose, and that is to heal us from our disconnection from wholeness, happiness, and the kind of fulfillment that nature is trying to bring us to. So it's the same for you and as it is for everybody. David Shaitman asked, what does Kabbalah think about energy that is present in the universe? The way that Kabbalah sees this is not on the level of the physical forces. It starts above the physical forces, and it looks at, well, what is energy? What are the underlying forces and the differentials, the contrasts, the basic contrast that brings about a delta, a difference between what and what that creates this potential or this active movement that we call force. It investigates not the physical forces, but the intentional forces that are on the root level of reality that bring about the physical forces. And it defines it this way. This is the starting point for it. The most fundamental way to look at it is that there are only two things in reality. There is actually only one thing, one force, and two sides of this force. And Kabbalists call these two forces the creator and the creature. And they are a positive and a negative. And between them, there is a potential. The positive is what we call bestowal, altruism, bestowal, emanation, radiance of a single quality. And that's all that it is. The other side of this force, which that initial force of bestowal created, is called the creature, and which we can understand in certain ways as the will to receive. It is reception as opposed to bestowal. Now, between these two forces, there is a huge gap of difference. And arrayed in that space between these two forces are all of the worlds that we see, say, the ones we don't see first, the spiritual worlds, the ones that are closer to the original single force, and all of those that cascade or mediate between the will to receive, or the creature, and the creative force, the creator, and the force of bestowal. And in that array, that cascading array between those two forces, lies all of the deltas, large and small, delta meaning differences, that create a necessity for emotion, but of what? What's actually moving, or what is movement that we call force? According to Kabbalah, the only thing that moves is the transformation of one quality in its incompleteness into a complete likeness of the force that created it. I know that's hard to get your head around. It has to really happen experientially, but you can look at it like the difference between you and a friend. What things you have in common and what things you don't have in common. The inner commonality of these two forces, their likeness or difference, is what makes all energy arise. And of course, there's going to be a background energy that exists in the universe, because the universe is the creature. The universe is part of the will to receive, and everything that is not that first force is the creature. Humanity is just the cognitive part of it that can become engaged in that whole process consciously and learn how to ascend through those differences and work like or cling to the initial force. I got a series of questions from a serious questioner, Funny Games 93, and he regularly, or she, I don't know, regularly puts questions and comments into the comment area. So I'll try to answer all of yours, okay? But I'm going to try to answer them short because you did ask a lot, right? First, Kabbalah says that our world is good and that our own perception sees the world as bad, yet Kabbalah says that we need to be corrected, which means that we still have to change ourselves because not everything is good or not corrected. Kind of a contradiction. Well, I don't see the contradiction. The world is good, but we don't perceive it as good. In other words, it's not the fault of the world, it's the fault of our perception. Is perception an absolute? No. Perception is a moving target. Perception for us in the physical world means that it's based on an incomplete picture of what actually exists there. And so what we're trying to do is to, correction is a tough term because it's loaded. we give it a lot of corporeal meanings, but all it means is a transformation through a process that allows us to take in more and more of the objective reality of the world, which is ultimately good. And of course, we don't think that that's the case. I mean, you may say that's a contradiction, but in fact, the way that you put the question means that you don't see the world as good. So which is it? The world is good and I don't see it, or the world isn't good, and why bother trying to see it because my perception can't reach it anyway, if you know what I mean. And then he asks, who has to be corrected, I on my own or every person on this planet? You are not on your own. The correction is the changing of that perception, because through the connection with others, that's how we actually expand the perception to see that everything is connected and for the good. So it's only from the point of view of the one undergoing the transformation, it is only you that has to change. Everything else is perfect. Do the 613 commandments not apply to the physical world? If only in the spiritual world, then why do I feel that the commandments are the correct way to behave in the physical world? Well, they are the correct way to behave in the physical world. But it's not that they don't apply to the physical world, it's just that they become something very different here. In the physical world, doing the physical commandments means that it's a kind of a control, a behavioral system that prevents us from taking destructive actions, and maybe it makes us think, reflect on, and question what the source of these things are, or why that would be the law, why it would be a commandment. But what it's really aimed at, what the real commandments are aimed at, is at the intention that would make a person work the way that the commandments are instructing us anyway. That a person would essentially be one and the same with the law of nature and be acting out of that same impulse, and therefore they would do all those things. Maybe not specifically in that specific form that, according to how they're written in the table of the law or that kind of thing. And then he has a follow-up question. In the case of the commandments, if they only apply to the spiritual, how should I view them? It sounds like I can do whatever I want in this world as long as I don't do something bad to others, which sounds like Satanism, or reminds me of Satanism. Well, Satanism is about doing whatever you want, regardless of whether it hurts people. So no, it's not that. The best is actually, if you want to do this, is to do both. Do the physical and study, learn, and attain the spiritual. Because that's where the real actions are. They are on not the branch level. The real actions that bring good to people are the things that issue from the same thought as the thought that created everything. And when we align with that, we're keeping the law, and therefore the things that we do will actually bring good. Whereas if we just do the externals, if we try to give somebody this or that out of some limited understanding and only because we're being compelled to act a certain way inside the framework of a certain society or religious beliefs, I think that the thousands of years of history that we can look back on tell us very clearly that that doesn't work. It doesn't actually help. So the true help will come from understanding the actual intentional act, the inner act that must be there before any action occurs. Another one. I remember Dr. Lightman once said that the spiritual world is the world that we always imagined and wanted. How do I know if it's the world that I want and not someone else's? I'm not sure how to ask this. Well, the spiritual world is the fulfillment of everything that you actually, truly do want. This is about fulfilling the things that are permanent, what you always wanted, what you will receive in permanence and will always have. It can't be somebody else's. It's what is motivating you. It's what you desire. So whether or not somebody else feels that their life has been fulfilled by reaching spirituality is something you will never know, taste, or see, because it actually isn't there. The only thing that is there is your experience of it and how inclusive your experience is or isn't. So it'll be the world that you always wanted, the friendship, the inclusiveness, the sense of at-homeness, the understanding and acceptance of and marveling at how good all of these forces that are at work on us actually are. The utter pleasure of seeing the great art of this world, the real creativity that exists, to see it all happening and to be part of it, not to be detached from it really in any way. This is, however, whatever the particulars are, it's still that fulfillment and happiness that you hold in the deepest part of your heart. Another one from Funny Games. Do we really have to attain spirituality here in the physical world before we can move to the world that we always imagined, the spiritual world? Well, the thing is this: there is no difference between this world and the spiritual world. It's all one world. It's only that our inability to perceive it correctly and to feel it correctly is what makes the physical world physical, or the physical world spiritual. We stop seeing the world that we call the physical, in a sense, because we're seeing the utter good in everything. So yeah, it has to happen in this world, because it has to be a waking, cognitive, emotional connection that is done consciously, and it has to take what we have here and turn it into, in our hearts, turn it into what it truly is. From Susan Martin. I'm interested in the question about beauty. Yeah, I mentioned something about how I thought that there was a question last week about what is beauty, and it kind of got me thinking. What is beauty from the perspective of Kabbalah? Does beauty help us glimpse higher worlds? I'm a wannabe composer and have always wanted to create music that helps the listener feel closer to God and which awakens the deepest part of the soul. I'd like to learn how Kabbalah could help me create music in order to bestow, to help others feel connected, and how I could learn to recognize music composed by others who composed or performed from higher spiritual states. Hi, Susan. I'm a composer. That's my profession. So this is a very interesting question to me. Let's start with beauty. You said, does beauty help us glimpse higher worlds? Well, it gives us a sensation of the quality of higher worlds because it allows us to feel directly and emotionally, without the intellect, a quality of harmonious interconnection, and yet there's expression. Everything in music goes according to law or against the law, right? It's very ordered, and its meaning comes partially from the order that we give it, because it gives us a language of understanding. Scales, modes, intervals, all of these things, they're fixed, and in general, and we work with them, and because we've heard them enough, we have a language that we seem to understand from these very emotional, almost non-physical things. In Kabbalah, the sense of hearing is considered to be the highest sense of the five senses. It's the immaterial sense. Yes, there are sound waves and all that, but in terms of our perception, it evokes complex reactions in us that are basically emotional. Out of those, we can build, it's possible to build pictures and so on, but essentially that's not what is happening there. So music already deals with the subtlest level of our perceptions, and it is the subtlest art. But it doesn't bring us closer. It doesn't let us glimpse that. It just lets us see what the quality of those higher levels are somewhat like. What we're feeling that gives us this ecstatic sense is the sense of that it's beyond our ability to perceive all of the moving parts, and yet they move together in a complete harmonious way. They express something greater than our perception, and they also, in most of the time, the kinds of music that express this kind of thing, they feel purposeful. They feel melodic. They are traveling towards something, and they are accompanied by a perfect balance as they do this. Even if something leads in a certain way, it's evident that the law of music is supporting this melody in this form, and then it can change its form if the harmonizing of that melody changes in relation to it. It's like the beautiful complexity of nature. Beautiful in the sense that it is always expressing symmetry, goodness. Now, even if you learn all these things and you become a brilliant orchestrator, a person will not consciously be expressing these higher worlds. They will be mechanically expressing it because they are a servant of the laws of music. And Kabbalah per se will not help a person express these things to other people, because the artist, in this case, has to transform themselves. They have to change how they perceive and why they're doing the music in the first place. They have to undergo the transformation. It's the same as with science. The spiritual science means that the spiritual scientist has to change themselves in order to perceive the actual forces and how they work. You can't stay separate from them. You have to become like them. So I found that studying Kabbalah gave me indirectly, and I cannot show any cause and effect, gave me a far greater ability to compose. I could do things, say, a few years after studying Kabbalah that I could not do before, without studying music specifically, but simply in understanding the laws of creativity. What really creates? How are things created? What's our relationship to them? What does it make us feel? But on the level, just of the level of trying to attain spirituality, working towards that. If we try to approach Kabbalah, just like I said to the friend who wanted to know about healing or illness, if we approach it in order to become a better composer, then we will probably not become a better composer, and we certainly won't be a Kabbalist. These things there is a cause and effect here, but it's not a direct cause and effect. Now, if you're really interested in hearing some music that was consciously created from the highest state for the purpose of communicating that state to others, here is a link to a video that deals with that, and this music was written by Kabbalists, but you'll see that it's very, very simple, straightforward melodic music. From Eddie Feig. I don't know if it's Eddie or Edie. Why are so many people asking about the end times or the end of the earth? The reason that people are doing that right now is because this is a period in which the individuality, the individual perception of people is breaking down. It's becoming more and more transparent. What we actually are is being revealed to us, and that means that humanity as a whole, even the unconscious part of humanity, feels this undercurrent happening. It's a big change that's coming, and we are really all one being. So if enough people consciously begin to feel, understand, and work towards this kind of spiritual evolution of really living as the whole, then it ripples through every other part of the collective creature. There's just the creator and the creature, and now the creature is beginning to feel itself and sense itself as a collective and is evolving. So people cannot imagine how this could possibly be, that it could possibly be a good thing. The undercurrent is, the unconscious part of it is, something's happening, and it must be, well, my imagination says something's going to end, so I imagine the world's going to end. But there's no such thing. Everything is just evolutionary, and it's towards the good. From David Schaefman, how does Kabbalah understand consciousness? Well, consciousness, are you meaning the consciousness of humans, human consciousness, individual consciousness, or consciousness itself, the general total beingness of being, the essence of being? So in terms of the essence of being, this is a thing in Kabbalah called azmuta, which means essence. Kabbalah teaches absolutely nothing about it because human consciousness, human awareness, the other side of the picture, is incapable of perceiving anything about it. Not only that, we are also incapable of perceiving anything about our own essence. What we think of as human consciousness is the result of the difference between that general essence called the creator, that general force of light called the creator, not essence but the force of light, something that it intends, that the initial essence intends. It's forbidden to even in Kabbalah to talk about the essence, and that means it is impossible. So there's the light and what the creator intends, and then there is the will to receive, which is you, basically, or the nature of you. Now, between those two, that's where human consciousness exists, and it doesn't exist in and of itself. It's the result of forces working on the creature, and it's got to do with all the differences that happen as we evolve. It's a very deep subject and a deeply misunderstood thing. And I can't go any further than that, and even if I did, it would not be understood. It really couldn't be grasped, not because you're not smart enough to get it, but because it requires experience. It requires knowing the method, and then doing the work that's in the method, and doing it with other people, because consciousness is really transactional. It's not the possession of either end of the pole. It has to do with relationship, and that's about as far as it's possible to speak about it without the study. Richard B. asked, what's your view of George Washington's vision? George Washington had a vision at the Valley Forge camp in which supposedly he was told about what would happen in the Revolutionary War, the War of Independence, what would happen, that there would be a war. These are interpretations. There would be a civil war, that there will be some kind of huge catastrophic war, and that's interpreted as a Third World War by people. I don't know why they pick Third World War, but that's what they say. And then eventually they will come back into unity, and unity plays as a constant figure in this image. It's always to stray away from unity and then to reunite, and that eventually unity brings this complete goodness for America. Now, Kabbalah doesn't say anything about it. I mean, I have impressions about it, but I don't know that they're really worth much. It seems to be talking about general things, forces that are at work in people, and somebody who is thinking about a lot of people and is working as a leader and so on would probably have these things on the large scale going through them. And these are just general forces in nature. Unity is the essence of the purpose of human life and development. So I would say, he's on target. He was on target. But more than that, nothing official from Kabbalah, just personal stuff. Ronit Livni, for the purpose of adhesion, I infuse pleasurable events that come my way with an intention to bestow, just like the gracious guest. But I still enjoy the sunset or the meal, for example. Does that take away from adhesion? Does it take away from the pleasure, as it inserts a degree of aloofness? But I guess that's part of growing up spiritually. Yeah, but adhesion's not about the pleasure itself. It's about why we are enjoying, for whom we're enjoying. Is it coming just directly into me, and am I taking it for that reason because I want to enjoy? There actually is no aloofness in this story of the guest and the host. There is actually a kind of a much deeper engagement, a kind of a restriction that says, wait a minute, this is going to be consciously received and enjoyed for the sake of the person who wanted to give me this pleasure, not just for me. There's a conscious decision, and there is a greater pleasure because it's not just the pleasure that a person has of their own, it is the shared pleasure that came from the original intention of the host towards you. And finally, the last question, how can Kabbalah change my life? Well, it can change the happiness in your life, the engagement, the sense of being at home, the connection with other people, the sense of exclusion, loneliness, lack of purpose, all of that disappears, and we become completely engaged in life in the same way that we would as children going out to play with a group of friends early on a spring morning, maybe even before you have to, you were of age to go to school. There's just that complete living into life as it is, without the kinds of questions, self-doubts that plague us, hamper us, and make us unable to enjoy, to give enjoyment to others. It lets us understand not just the stuff in our neighborhood, but it makes the entire creation our neighborhood. It puts us at home with the forces of nature, with the impulses of our heart, with things. We're not fooled by the disguises or the partitions in nature or in human nature, but we rise to a place where we actually function above them. it makes everything in life beautiful, symmetrical, balanced, and it reveals them as good. That's it. That's just about all the questions that I got last week, and I hope that you got something out of it and that you too have a wise Wednesday, and I'll see you next week.